Don't cry, mister. You can borrow my mom. Those 9 words spoken by a 5-year-old to a billionaire CEO in a hotel lobby would crack open a secret buried for 26 years, a secret that began on a Christmas Eve park bench when a forgotten boy received a card that would change 3 lives forever. But here's what you need to understand. Sometimes the most heartwarming miracles don't look like miracles at all. Sometimes they look like a shy girl scrubbing floors at midnight, whispering scripts to empty hallways, raising a child the world had abandoned. Would you recognize a miracle if it wore a janitor's uniform? The boutique hotel on 5th Street wasn't the kind of place where people made eye contact. Guests disappeared into elevators before the concierge could finish his greeting. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, reflecting a world where everyone knew their place. Hannah Cole knew hers. At 27, this shy girl worked the night shift as a cleaner, practically invisible in her gray uniform. She scrubbed away evidence of other people's lives before dawn. Her supervisor's voice cut through the lobby. "Make sure that stain's gone, Hannah. The real work happens upstairs." Hannah nodded, eyes down, gloved hands moving across marble that cost more than her yearly rent. In the shadowed corner sat Eli Blake, 35, CEO of Blake Innovations, in a suit that whispered wealth. His tie hung loose, eyes carrying exhaustion that sleep couldn't fix. The business magazines called him the heartless tech king. Tonight, staring at cold espresso, he just looked like someone who'd forgotten how to feel. Luke Cole sat on a lobby chair, legs swinging, holding a tin decorated with crooked stars. His mother's homemade cookies, the only Christmas present they could afford to share. He'd been watching the sad man for 10 minutes with that unblinking honesty that makes adults uncomfortable. Finally, Luke slid off the chair. His sneakers squeaked across the perfect floor. "Don't cry, mister." Eli looked up, startled. He wasn't crying. Or maybe he was. "You can borrow my mom," Luke continued matter of fact. "She's new at it, but she's really good." The words hit Eli like a punch to the chest. Borrow. That word. That impossible, devastating word. Eli's hand moved to his wallet, finding the worn edge of a card he'd carried for 26 years. A card he'd received on Christmas Eve as a 9-year-old boy named Elliot Walker, sitting alone on a park bench, waiting for a family that never came. The card's message was burned into his memory. "You deserve a Christmas, even if you have to borrow someone else's family tonight." He'd kept it through 17 foster homes, 3 name changes, and the building of a fortune. It was the only proof that someone somewhere had once cared, if he felt alone. And now this child, this impossibly kind, heartwarming child, had just repeated those exact words. Hannah rushed over, cheeks flushed with panic. "Luke, you can't just—" "I'm so sorry, sir. He's friendly. He doesn't understand." Eli looked at her properly. This shy girl with the messy ponytail and wrinkled uniform eyes, drowning in apologies for existing. "It's okay." Eli managed, voice rough. "Actually, thank you. Both of you." Luke beamed and opened his cookie tin with pride. "Mom made too many. You can borrow one too." For the first time in months, Eli Blake laughed a real laugh. He accepted a cookie still warm and felt something crack open in his chest. He didn't know it yet, but that cookie, that word, borrow, that child's fearless compassion, would lead him back to the Christmas Eve that had defined his entire life, and to the discovery that the shy girl apologizing in front of him held the key to a mystery connecting them all. What secret was hidden in that 26-year-old card? And why would a stranger's son know the exact words that had once saved a broken boy's life? The bus ride home smelled like wet wool and exhaust. Hannah rested her forehead against the cold window while Luke colored in his notebook. "Mom, why was that man so sad?" Hannah touched Luke's hair. Sometimes grown-ups carry invisible weights, sweetheart. Like your backpack when it's full of sheets. Despite her exhaustion, Hannah smiled. Yeah, baby, exactly like that. Mrs. Thompson waited on the third-floor landing with an apple pie and a cardboard box. Hannah, dear, come in for a moment. Margaret Thompson was 70, sharp-eyed despite the years. She'd spent 40 years as a social worker before retiring into this building. Luke made a beeline for the pie. Hannah hesitated at the box. I was cleaning out my closet, the older woman said carefully. Found some old case files. Thought you might want to keep one. Inside Hannah's tiny kitchen, Luke was drawing his family tree for school. He'd drawn Hannah at the center like a sun himself orbiting her and Mrs. Thompson as a bright star labeled Miss Maggie. Miss Maggie, what happened to the kids you couldn't keep? Mrs. Thompson set down her tea hands, trembling. They're still out there somewhere, Luke, growing up, making lives. I just hope they know someone once wanted them to stay. After Luke fell asleep, Hannah opened the box. Inside were files, faded photographs, handwritten notes from children who'd passed through the foster system. One file was thicker. Elliot Walker, age 9, temporary placement, Christmas week. The photograph showed a boy with dark, messy hair and eyes decades older than his 9 years. He wore a red scarf, sitting rigid arms wrapped protectively around himself. Hannah's breath stopped. She knew that face, older now, harder, hidden behind tailored suits. Those eyes were unmistakable. She'd seen them hours ago in the hotel lobby. Inside the file was a photocopy of a card in Mrs. Thompson's handwriting. You deserve a Christmas, even if you have to borrow someone else's family tonight. The exact words Luke had said to the stranger. Hannah grabbed her phone, typing frantically. Eli Blake, CEO, self-made billionaire. No family mentioned. Born. Information unavailable. But they're buried in an old interview. Blake legally changed his name at 18. When asked about his childhood, he declined to comment. Elliot Walker. Eli Blake. The boy Mrs. Thompson had been forced to let go. The man who'd laughed at her son's kindness, with eyes that looked like they were remembering how to feel. Hannah walked to her wall, covered in scraps of her writing. One line written 6 years ago, borrowed light is supposed to be returned, but if you hold it tight enough, it can stay forever. She'd written that after adopting Luke, after pulling him from the same system that had almost swallowed her. Her grandmother had rescued her just in time. Luke appeared in the doorway, half asleep. Mom. Can people borrow more than just moms? Can they borrow whole families? Hannah pulled him close. Yeah, sweetheart. I think sometimes that's exactly what people need, until they realize they've been keeping it all along. The next morning, Eli couldn't sleep. He kept replaying Luke's words, the mother's apology, the warmth of that homemade cookie. At the hotel front desk, he approached with authority. The night shift cleaner from yesterday. I need her name. Hannah Cole, Mr. Blake. Single mother. She's been with us 3 years. Eli nodded. Through the hotel manager, he sent a message he'd like to invite Hannah and her son for hot chocolate. Nothing formal, just thanks. 2 hours later, they sat at a corner cafe. Luke launched into enthusiastic explanation of how his mom wrote stories. She writes about lights and benches and kids who think nobody sees them. Eli's heart stuttered. You write. Hannah's face flushed. She just small things. Scripts for kids in our neighborhood. Nothing important. Luke yanked a folded paper from his backpack, a hand-drawn poster, The Borrowed Light, a play by H. Cole. Eli touched the paper carefully. What's it about? Hannah stared into her cocoa. It's about a boy who believes the only light he has is light he borrows from other people. until someone teaches him that he's been shining on his own the entire time. Eli's throat constricted. He'd spent 15 years building an empire to prove he didn't need anyone. Changed his name, erased his past. And here sat this woman who cleaned hotel rooms at midnight, who'd somehow written his entire buried trauma into a children's play. "The Blake Foundation funds community projects," he said. "Would you send me your script?" Hannah's eyes went wide. "I'm just a cleaner. You don't have to. I'm the guy who borrowed Luke's cookie, remember?" Eli's smile was small but genuine. "Maybe it's time I returned something." Luke bounced excitedly. "Does that mean Mom's story gets to be a real play with actual lights and costumes?" Eli looked at Hannah, shy, talented, invisible Hannah who adopted children the world discarded and transformed their pain into art. "Yeah, kid. Everything." And just like that, the woman who'd spent years scrubbing floors in darkness was about to step into blinding light. But some people can't stand to watch others shine. Blake Innovations headquarters occupied 12 floors of steel and glass. Eli's corner office had floor-to-ceiling windows and a desk he rarely used, because sitting still meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. Paige Turner stood before that desk, now designer heels, clicking impatiently. "A community play," she repeated, voice dripping disdain. "Written by a hotel cleaner. Written by someone who understands invisibility." Eli corrected, sliding Hannah's script across the polished surface. "We're funding it. Full sponsorship." Paige picked up the script like it might contaminate her. She was 35, Yale-educated, with intelligence sharp enough to cut and ambition that burned hotter than conscience. She'd clawed to PR director by being ruthless about the company's image and her own. "Eli, we're actively repairing your reputation. Heartless tech king. Remember, we need strategic moves, not sentimental pet projects. This isn't sentiment. It's a good story. Fund it." He turned to his monitor, conversation terminated. Paige left jaw tight. She'd written a play once, too. Years ago, before PR consumed her soul. Nobody had funded it. Nobody had read past the first act. And now Eli Blake was handing money to a nobody while Paige's work gathered digital dust. The injustice burned like acid. The community center on Maple Street hadn't seen this much energy in years. Hannah stood in a room full of children, feeling like an imposter. "Okay, everyone, let's try the opening scene one more time." Luke played the lead with unself-conscious confidence. Mrs. Thompson arranged chairs and mended costumes, watching Hannah with quiet pride. Eli appeared at the third rehearsal, standing in the doorway, like someone afraid to cross an invisible threshold. He watched Hannah gently correct a child's blocking saw, how the shyest kids gravitated toward her like safe harbor. He'd never wanted to belong to something as desperately as he wanted to belong to this. One evening after the children left, he walked Hannah home through falling snow. "Aren't you worried people will say you're only doing this for PR?" Hannah asked. "They called me heartless in print. If they start calling me soft, I suppose that's progress." He paused. "What are you afraid people will say about you?" "I'm afraid that if anyone expects anything real from me, I'll prove them right for overlooking me in the first place." Eli stopped walking. "You adopted a child most people would have walked past. You turned a cramped apartment into a home. You wrote a story that made me feel less alone for the first time in 20 years. His voice dropped. "You're the kind of person it's hard to be disappointed in." Hannah met his eyes for just a heartbeat before looking away, but she didn't argue. Dress rehearsal was December 18th, 1 week before Christmas. 1 week before, everything fell apart. Luke ran up to Hannah, waving her phone. "Mom, someone wrote about our play online." Hannah's heart lifted for exactly 3 seconds before plummeting. Is Blake Innovations funding a plagiarist? The blog post was anonymous but professionally crafted. It dissected the borrowed light scene by scene, comparing it to an obscure play called Reflected Glow, written 8 years prior. The similarities seemed damning. A child who feels invisible, the metaphor of borrowed light. Even specific dialogue appeared to match. The post spread through social media like wildfire. Just another PR stunt from Blake. Zero due diligence. A hotel cleaner suddenly writes a play, right? This is what happens when you give opportunities to people who don't belong. By 9 p.m., Blake Foundation issued a statement. Blake Innovations takes intellectual property violations seriously. Funding for The Borrowed Light is suspended pending investigation. Hannah read the statement on the bus, Luke asleep against her shoulder. Her hands trembled. She tried calling Eli. Voicemail emergency board meeting. She tried texting. Nothing. Silence that felt like judgment. At home, she pulled the play poster off the wall. Script pages scattered across the floor, like evidence of her foolishness. Maybe they're right, she whispered. Someone like me was never supposed to be on a stage. Mrs. Thompson found her an hour later, sitting in darkness. Hannah, child, I didn't steal it, Maggie. I swear. I know that. The question is, does he... Hannah looked at her phone. Still no call from Eli. The silence felt louder than accusations. At school the next day, Luke's classmates circled him with cruel efficiency. Your mom's a thief. She just scrubs toilets. What did anyone expect? Luke's face flushed, red hands balling into fists. She's not a thief. She wrote it for kids like me who feel invisible, and she works harder than anyone. But his voice cracked, and the tears came, and the teacher had to intervene. That afternoon, Luke didn't board the bus. He walked 3 miles to the park to the bench where people went when they believed nobody cared enough to search. He sat down, pulled his knees to his chest, and waited in the falling snow. Maybe if he waited long enough, someone would prove that he and his mom were worth choosing. But sometimes the cruelest thing isn't being abandoned. It's being chosen, believed in, lifted up, and then dropped the moment things get complicated. Eli stared at Paige across the glass conference table, his voice carrying the calm that preceded storms. Who authorized that press release? I did, following crisis protocol. Paige slid a folder across with calculated confidence. The evidence appeared substantial. We needed to protect the company's reputation. The company's reputation or yours? Paige's professional smile tightened. I don't understand. You wrote a play once. Reflected Glow. It never saw production, never received funding. Eli leaned forward. And now suddenly there's a plagiarism scandal, and you're positioned as the hero who uncovered it. I followed established protocol. You followed resentment. His voice could have etched glass. Get legal in here. Immediately. The company lawyer arrived within minutes. We accessed archived emails from the community center's server. Hannah Cole's drafts of The Borrowed Light are documented back 6 years, sent to after-school coordinators, time-stamped, logged. The lawyer clicked through screenshots. Ms. Turner, your play was written 3 years ago and was never formally registered. Eli's jaw tightened. So Hannah's been sharing her work since 2019. Paige wrote something similar in 2022. And somehow Paige concludes Hannah is the plagiarist. Paige stood abruptly. Those emails could be backdated. They're server-side logs with encryption timestamps. Legally bulletproof. The lawyer closed the laptop. Ms. Cole has documentation. Your play exists only as a single document with metadata that proves when it was created. The silence was absolute. You manufactured a crisis to destroy someone you perceived as beneath you. Eli gestured toward the door. You're suspended immediately. If I find evidence you planted this story, you'll never work in communications again. Page left heels clicking like gunshots. Eli grabbed his phone. 17 missed calls from Hannah. He called back immediately. No answer. Then a text from an unfamiliar number. Eli, it's Margaret Thompson. Luke is missing. Hannah is searching everywhere. She thinks he might have gone to the park. The bench from your file. You know which one. The air evacuated Eli's lungs. That bench. The same bench where he'd sat at 9 years old on Christmas Eve waiting for a family that never came. He grabbed his coat and ran. The park was nearly empty, snow falling hard. Hannah ran through the paths calling Luke's name. Mrs. Thompson checked the playground, the gazebo, the pond's edge. Eli headed straight for the bench with the certainty of someone following a map written in scar tissue. There sat Luke, small, shivering, eyes red but jaw set in stubborn defiance. Luke. Eli's voice cracked. The boy looked up, then away. I didn't mean to make Mom cry. I just wanted to see if someone still comes back to a bench like this. If the people who choose you actually mean it when things get hard. Eli sat down, took off his coat, and wrapped it around Luke's shoulders. Listen carefully. His hands trembled. Nobody came for me that night. The night I sat here 26 years ago. I waited until my hands went numb and I couldn't feel my face. Luke stared at him with eyes too old for his age. But you have 2 people running through the snow right now, terrified because they can't stand not knowing you're safe. You have a mom who loves you so profoundly, she thinks she's not good enough for you. Luke. Hannah's scream echoed across the park. She crashed through the snow, fell to her knees, pulling Luke into her arms with a sob that came from her soul. Baby, I'm so sorry, I thought I lost you. I didn't mean to make you sad, Mom. You didn't, sweetheart, you never could. I love you more than breathing. Eli stood to give them space, but Luke's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Don't go, please don't leave. Not like everybody else. So Eli sat back down, and Hannah's arms circled both of them, and Mrs. Thompson arrived breathless and crying, and for one long moment, the 4 of them held each other in the falling snow, breathing alive, together, chosen. Finally, Mrs. Thompson spoke. Elliot Walker. Eli went completely still. No one's called me that in 17 years. I know, child. She touched his face. I'm the one who took you home that Christmas Eve. I'm the one who wrote the card you've carried. Her eyes filled with tears. And I'm the one who brought Luke to Hannah 3 years ago because I thought, if Elliot had had someone like her back then, maybe everything would have been different. The truth settled over them like snow, quiet, inevitable, transforming. Mrs. Thompson, the social worker who couldn't keep Eli, who retired carrying guilt, who moved into Hannah's building and saw in a young girl the same fear she'd once seen in Eli's eyes. Hannah looked at Eli. You're the boy from the file? The one Maggie always mentioned. And you're the woman who writes scripts about children who feel invisible. Eli laughed, broken and somehow beautiful. We're quite a pair. Luke said what only children dare. So does this mean you're keeping us, like not borrowing anymore for real this time? Eli pulled the old card from his wallet, creased, faded, sacred. He handed it to Mrs. Thompson with shaking fingers. My whole life I believed no one really chose me. I was wrong. You did. And you've been choosing me, choosing us, all along. But proving to the world that Hannah deserved to be chosen, that would require one more battle. The press conference happened 48 hours later. Eli Blake stood before cameras and reporters, calm and unyielding. Blake Innovations made a serious error. We suspended funding for The Borrowed Light based on manipulated information designed to discredit Hannah Cole. He let those words settle. Today we're reinstating full funding with my personal oversight, and I owe Ms. Cole a public apology. A reporter shouted, "Is it true your PR director fabricated the plagiarism allegations?" Paige Turner has been suspended indefinitely. Our legal team confirmed Ms. Cole's work predates any similar material by years. She's been writing for children in her community since 2019 with verified documentation. She didn't plagiarize anything. Someone attempted to steal her voice. But why sponsor a play written by a hotel cleaner? Eli's expression hardened. Because hotel cleaner is a job description, not a definition of human worth. Hannah Cole is a writer who saw forgotten children and gave them art instead of pity. A mother who adopted a child from the foster system and gave him a home filled with stories and safety. He paused deliberately. And perhaps because I was one of those forgotten foster children once, and nobody funded the people who tried to see me as human. The room erupted in camera flashes. Later that evening, Eli found Hannah sitting on the floor outside the community center, knees pulled to her chest. You didn't have to do all that. The press conference, the public statements. I did have to. He slid down beside her. All my life people have lied about me, called me cold, ruthless, heartless. I survived all of that. He turned to face her. But I won't survive watching someone lie about you. Not when your son walked up to a stranger and offered to lend him his mother, and that stranger turned out to be me. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. I was terrified you believed them, that you'd already decided I wasn't worth the complication. Hannah. He took her hand tentatively. You adopted a child the world had given up on. You write stories for children who believe they're invisible. You let a broken stranger into your life because your 5-year-old son said it was okay. His voice dropped. I don't know how to say this without sounding like someone who's never said it before, but you're the best kind of trouble I've ever encountered. She laughed. Wet, startled, surprised by joy. I don't know how to be close to someone who isn't Luke. Perfect. I don't know how to be close to anyone at all. We'll be terrible at it together. Paige Turner cleared out her office the following week. Eli reassigned her to grant writing for the Blake Foundation's nonprofit partnerships. You wanted to be a writer once, he said. Now you'll write for organizations that genuinely need support. Consider it an opportunity to remember what stories are supposed to accomplish. 3 months later, a small envelope arrived at the community center addressed to Hannah. I was wrong. I'm sorry I tried to steal your light and your voice, PT. It wasn't much. It wasn't enough. But it was something, a small acknowledgement, that even the cruel could learn. The night before the play's rescheduled performance, Hannah stood alone in the empty community center checking props for the 100th time. Eli appeared in the doorway, tie loosened. You're going to wear a hole in that stage floor. I'm absolutely terrified. Of what specifically? That I'll look out at the audience tomorrow and realize I don't actually belong there. That this whole thing was just borrowed time, borrowed courage. That I'm still just the shy girl who cleans up after the real artists go home. Eli walked onto the stage, stood directly in front of her. You want to know what I realized? I spent years thinking I only deserved to rent temporary space in other people's lives. He looked at her with absolute certainty. But this is the first time I've ever wanted a place that isn't borrowed or conditional. If you'll have me. Hannah's breath caught. I don't know how to be a CEO's girlfriend. I don't know the rules of that world. Excellent, he said, a ghost of a smile appearing. I've never been the boyfriend of a cleaner turned playwright. We can figure it out together. He reached for her hand, slowly giving her time to refuse. Not desperate, just offering. Present. Choosing. Hannah took it, her fingers intertwining with his. And for the first time in her life, she didn't apologize for taking up space in someone else's world. Opening night of The Borrowed Light fell on December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas, exactly 26 years after a 9-year-old boy sat alone on a bench, believing nobody would choose him. The community center was packed beyond capacity. Eli sat in the front row beside Mrs. Thompson, both clutching programs that read, "Written and directed by Hannah Cole." Those words, her name, in print, real and undeniable. The lights dimmed. Luke stepped onto the stage wearing a costume Hannah had stitched by hand, a simple shirt covered in fabric stars. He played the boy who thought he existed only in borrowed brightness. The final scene arrived quietly, powerfully. Luke stood center stage surrounded by other children, holding battery-powered lanterns. When you're lost in the dark, you can borrow someone's light. Luke said, his voice clear and strong. But one day, you realize it was yours all along. You were just too scared to turn it on. The children lifted their lanterns in unison, and the stage flooded with soft, warm light. The audience erupted in thunderous applause. Mrs. Thompson cried openly. Eli's eyes were wet, but he refused to look away from the proof that broken things could be beautiful. After the crowd cleared, Hannah stayed backstage organizing props. Eli found her looking at her like she'd personally rearranged the constellations. "You know, I spent years believing I only deserved to exist on the margins of people's lives," he said quietly. "I know," Hannah whispered. "I read your file. I know exactly how that feels." He laughed, broken, relieved, beautiful. "This is the first time I've ever wanted a place that isn't borrowed or temporary." He stepped closer. "If you'll really have me." Hannah looked at her hands, stained with glitter glue nails cut short for practical work. But Eli wasn't looking at her hands. He was looking at her face with an expression that said she was the only thing that truly mattered. "I'm not borrowing any more, Hannah. I'm staying permanently if you'll have me." She met his eyes, still shy but learning steadiness. "You're already here. We just hadn't dared to look directly at it until now." He kissed her, then gentle, tentative, and Hannah kissed him back, discovering that maybe she'd been fluent all along. 2 weeks later, all four sat together on the park bench, the one that used to represent abandonment, and now meant something chosen and permanent. Luke held hot cocoa. Mrs. Thompson laughed at something Eli said. Eli's arm rested around Hannah's shoulders with casual permanence. The old bench plaque had been replaced with a new one reserved for families who choose each other. Sponsored by the Blake Foundation. Luke held up a new drawing, 4 stick figures under Christmas lights holding hands. The caption, "Not borrowed. My family. Forever." Eli carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into his wallet beside the old card from 26 years ago. 2 bookends of a life that had finally found its middle chapters. He looked at Hannah with eyes that had learned how to stay. "I'm not borrowing anymore. I'm keeping you. All of you." Hannah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "You already did. We just took the long way home to find each other." Luke, wedged between them, added, "Sometimes the long way is the best way. That's what Mom's play taught me." And in that moment, on a bench that had once meant loneliness, 4 people who'd been forgotten became the family they'd all been searching for. Not borrowed, not temporary, but chosen and permanent and real.